In the gentle landscape of Jesus' teachings, silence is not an emptiness to be feared, but a sacred space to be sought. It is a warm, inviting room where the soul can meet God. We see this in the rhythm of Jesus' own life, as he so often drew away from the crowds and even his closest friends to find a quiet mountainside or a solitary shore. In that profound stillness, he communed with his Father, finding clarity, strength, and deep intimacy. He wasn't simply escaping the noise of the world, he was entering the presence of love. He extends this same gentle invitation to our own hurried hearts, showing us that it is in the quiet that we can truly hear the whispers of grace. It is here we can lay down our burdens without having to explain them. Jesus tenderly instructs us in this practice, saying, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." This beautiful guidance is not about hiding, but about discovering a connection that is wholly and wonderfully ours. In the sacred hush, we are not being ignored, we are being fully heard. It is a loving silence, a profound quiet where our souls are restored and we can simply rest in the embrace of a peace that the world cannot give. In a world that shouts, that fills every empty moment with noise and hurry, there is a gentle countercultural call that echoes from the heart of the Gospels. It is a call not to more action but to less, not to more words but to a deeper listening. It is an invitation into the profound and loving landscape of silence. This is not the cold silence of absence or the tense silence of unspoken anger, but the warm, creative silence where the soul can breathe. It is the stillness Jesus sought on lonely hillsides under a canopy of stars, the quiet he inhabited even amidst the pressing crowds. He knew and tenderly shows us that it is only when we quiet the clamor of the world around us that we can finally hear the loving whisper of God within us. This sacred hush is where we are found, where we are healed, and where we truly come home to ourselves and to our Creator. Before we begin, we kindly invite you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel to help spread this valuable content to your family and friends. We thank you, and now, we invite you to listen. 1. Silence is the inner sanctuary where the soul meets God. It is the understanding that we carry a holy space within us, a room of the heart that we can enter at any time regardless of our external circumstances. This inner chamber does not require a physical building. Its door is closed with intention, and its quiet is cultivated by turning our focus away from the world's demands and toward the presence of the divine. It is the most intimate of all meeting places. One afternoon, the crowds pressing in on them were so thick with need and noise that Peter felt his spirit fraying. He found Jesus by the shore watching the gentle lapping of the waves. "Master," Peter said, his voice strained, "how can we find the quiet room you speak of when there is no room to be found? Every door is open, every space is filled with voices." Jesus smiled softly and placed a hand over Peter's heart. "The door I speak of, Peter, is here. This is the room. You can close its door even as you walk through the marketplace. The world cannot enter unless you invite it. Go there, and you will find the Father is already waiting." 2. Solitude is not a state of loneliness, but a pathway to communion. We are taught to fear being alone, to see it as a sign of being unwanted. But in the spiritual life, choosing solitude is a positive act of seeking a deeper, more profound connection. It is stepping away from the company of others not to reject them, but to be more fully present with God, so that we may return to them with a heart filled with a peace and love that is not our own. Andrew approached Jesus as he was returning from a night of prayer on the mountain. "Lord," he asked gently, "why do you go away from us? Does our company weary you?" Jesus stopped and looked at his disciple with great affection. "Oh, Andrew, I do not go away to escape you. I go away to be with my Father so that I may bring more of his heart back to you. If a cup is to be full for the thirsty, it must first be held steady under the spring. 3. In the world's stillness, the voice of God becomes clear. God's voice is rarely in the earthquake or the fire. It is most often a still, small whisper. The constant noise of our anxieties, our ambitions, and the world's distractions acts like a roaring wind, making it impossible to hear that gentle guidance. Silence is the act of intentionally calming the winds, of creating the necessary quiet for that divine whisper to be heard and understood. Jesus sat in the home of Mary and Martha. While Martha rushed about, her movements a whirlwind of hospitality and anxious service, Mary sat at Jesus' feet, enraptured and still. Martha finally stopped, exasperated. "Lord, does it not seem unfair that I do all the work?" Jesus looked at her with compassion. "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset by many things, and your heart is loud with tasks. But only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. She has quieted her heart enough to listen, and in that quiet she is receiving a feast I cannot place upon a dish." 4. True spiritual strength is renewed in quiet retreat. Constant output without spiritual input leads to exhaustion and emptiness. Jesus demonstrated a divine rhythm of engagement and withdrawal. He poured himself out for others, healing, teaching, loving, and then retreated into silence to be refilled by his Father. This teaches us that our service to the world is only sustainable when it is rooted in periods of quiet renewal. The apostles were gathered at the end of a long day, having seen Jesus heal dozens and teach thousands. They were weary to the bone, their own spirits feeling thin. John watched as Jesus, who had given more than any of them, slipped away from their camp and began to walk toward the dark hills. "Where does he find the strength?" John murmured to James. James watched his master's retreating form. "He does not find it, brother," he replied softly. "He goes to where the strength is. He goes to receive it." 5. Silence is a profound act of trust. To be silent before God is to admit that our own words are inadequate. It is to cease our striving, our pleading, our attempts to explain or justify ourselves, and to simply rest in the belief that God knows our hearts better than we do. It is a vulnerable posture that says, "I trust you to understand what I cannot even articulate." A man whose only son had passed away came to Jesus. He stood before him, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his grief, his mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. He was a vessel of silent agony. The apostles waited for him to speak, to make his request, but Jesus simply moved toward him and sat beside him on a rock. He did not speak either. They sat together in a shared, deep silence for a long time as the sun began to set. Finally, the man let out a long, shuddering breath and tears fell from his eyes. He had been heard in the place beyond words. 6. The closed door shuts out the world's validation to open the soul to God's affection. The instruction to pray in secret is a lesson in motive. Public piety often seeks the approval of others, but true spiritual life is not a performance. By closing the door, we remove the audience. In that private space, we are no longer praying to be seen as holy. We are simply a child speaking with their Father. It is here, away from the watching eyes of the world, that we can experience the pure, unmediated love of God. James and John were discussing which of them would sit at Jesus' right hand, their voices filled with ambition. Jesus overheard them and gathered them together. "The world seeks honor in the open square," he said, "but the kingdom's honor is found in a different place. When you speak to the Father, do not look to see who is watching. Go to your room, close the door, for the applause of men is a fleeting sound, but the Father's smile, which you can only see when you are alone with him, will light your soul for eternity." 7. Peace is not the absence of a storm, but the discovery of a quiet center within it. The world believes peace is a condition of our external environment. No conflict, no problems, no noise. But Jesus teaches a peace that can coexist with chaos. It is a deep internal stillness that comes from being anchored in God's presence, a quiet sanctuary in the heart that remains untouched even when the storms of life are raging. The boat was being tossed by a violent squall on the Sea of Galilee, and the apostles were frantic with fear, bailing water and shouting over the wind. Yet Jesus was asleep in the stern. When they woke him, crying, "Master, do you not care that we are perishing?" He calmed the storm with a word. Later, when they were safely on shore, he said to them, "The storm on the sea was loud, but the storm of fear in your hearts was louder. I could sleep because the sea within me was at peace. Seek that peace first, and you will find you can withstand any storm without." 8. To truly know God, we must first learn to be still with God. Knowledge of God is not merely an intellectual pursuit, a collection of facts and doctrines. It is a relational knowledge, born of shared presence. Just as we truly get to know a person by spending quiet, unhurried time with them, so we come to know God by ceasing our activity and simply being still in His presence, allowing His nature to impress itself upon our souls. Thomas, ever the questioner, followed Jesus with a list of queries. But how does the kingdom work? And what is the nature of the Father's will in this situation? And how can we know the way? Jesus listened patiently, then led him to a quiet olive grove. He gestured for Thomas to sit. "You seek to know by wrestling with thoughts, Thomas. Your mind is a whirlwind. For 1 hour, do not ask a single question. Do not try to solve a single riddle. Simply sit, be still, and let the answer find you." 9. Our unspoken burdens are heard most clearly in the sacred hush. We often feel we must articulate our pain perfectly for it to be understood. But God does not need our words. In silence, we can lay down our heaviest burdens, the griefs, fears, and shames for which we have no words, and trust that they are being received and understood by a love that transcends language. The silence itself becomes a form of prayer, a complete offering of our suffering heart. There was a woman in the village known for her deep sadness. A tragedy years before had stolen her joy. She would often watch Jesus from a distance but never dared to speak. One day, as Jesus was leaving, he stopped and looked directly at her across the dusty road. He said nothing, but his eyes were filled with a deep, knowing compassion. He simply nodded at her once, gently. In that moment, the woman felt the crushing weight on her chest lift just a little. He had heard the prayer she had never been able to utter. 10. A life of grace is a rhythm of sound and silence. Jesus' life was not one of perpetual retreat. It was a beautiful dance between deep engagement with the world's needs and deep retreat into the Father's presence. One cannot exist without the other. Silence fuels our action with love and wisdom, and our action sends us back to silence for clarity and renewal. To live fully is to honor both parts of this sacred rhythm. Philip watched Jesus for many weeks, marveling at the pattern. He would teach and heal until he was exhausted, and then he would vanish into the wilderness, returning with a light in his eyes. "Master," Philip asked one morning, "which is more important, the work we do for the people or the time we spend in prayer?" Jesus picked up a small lyre that someone had left behind. He plucked a string. "Tell me, Philip, which is more important?" "The note," he said, and then he let the string fall silent, or the rest that comes after that gives the next note its beauty. 11. Silence reveals the true condition of our own hearts. When we strip away the noise and distractions that keep us occupied, we are left with ourselves. In this unfiltered quiet, the thoughts we suppress, the fears we ignore, and the desires that truly drive us are allowed to surface. This inner landscape is not always peaceful, but seeing it clearly is the first step toward healing and transformation. Silence, then, is a divine mirror. Matthew, who had spent his life surrounded by the clatter of coins and the clamor of the marketplace, found the quiet unnerving. He came to Jesus one evening, agitated. "Master, when I try to be silent, as you say, my mind is a storm." I hear only my old greeds, my past sins, the voices of men I have cheated." Jesus placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "That is good, Matthew. The silence did not create the storm. It only allowed you to see the one that was already raging within you. Now that you see it, we can calm it together." 12. To choose silence in a world that demands a response is an act of radical humility. Our world equates being right with being the loudest. We are conditioned to defend, explain, and assert ourselves. To choose silence, especially when we could easily win an argument or justify our position, is to humble ourselves. It is a quiet declaration that our need to be right is less important than our desire for peace and our trust in God's ultimate vindication. A merchant began shouting at Bartholomew in the marketplace, falsely accusing him of shortchanging him. The other apostles began to rise in defense, but Bartholomew remained quiet, his expression calm. The man eventually ran out of words and stormed away. Later, Philip asked, "Why did you not defend yourself? You were innocent." Bartholomew replied, "I learned from the Master. My honor does not live in that man's opinion. To argue would be to feed his anger. My silence starved it." 13. In silence, we learn the divine language of patience. Haste is a product of noise. It is the feeling that everything must happen now, that we must rush to the next thing. Silence slows us down. It forces us to inhabit the present moment and to wait. In this waiting, we cultivate patience, learning to trust in God's timing rather than our own. Like a farmer who cannot rush the harvest but must wait for the seed to grow in the quiet earth. Peter fidgeted by the well, waiting for Jesus, who was speaking to a Samaritan woman. He kept looking at the sun, anxious to move on. When Jesus finally rejoined them, Peter said, "Master, we have lost so much time." Jesus looked back at the woman, who was now running to her village with joy. "Peter," he said gently, "you see time as a path to be hurried down. I see it as a field to be cultivated, and some seeds," he smiled, "only sprout in the soil of a slow, patient moment." 14. Silence is the fertile ground where a divine calling can take root. A calling from God is rarely a shout. It is often a seed of an idea, a gentle nudge of the heart. For this seed to germinate, it needs a quiet and receptive environment, free from the weeds of distraction and the noise of other people's expectations. In the stillness, we can feel the subtle pull of God's purpose for our lives and allow it to grow into a clear conviction. A young man named Joel, a carpenter's son, felt a stirring in his soul but did not know its meaning. He brought his confusion to Jesus. "I feel I am meant for more than just wood and nails, but I do not know what." Jesus advised him, "For 1 week, spend the first hour of your day not in your workshop, but on the hill behind your home. Do not ask for an answer, just be quiet, listen to the wind, watch the sunrise, give the seed of your calling the quiet earth it needs to break through the soil." 15. Shared silence can be more intimate than 1,000 words. While we often think of silence as a solitary pursuit, it can also be a profound way of connecting with another person. To sit with someone in comfortable, understanding silence is to communicate a deep sense of acceptance and presence. It says, "I am here with you. You do not need to perform or explain yourself." This shared quiet can build a bond of intimacy far stronger than that built by casual conversation. Jesus went to the house of Jairus after raising his daughter from the dead. The family was overwhelmed with a joy so deep it left them speechless. Jesus didn't fill the room with teachings or pronouncements. He simply sat with them at their table as the little girl ate. In the shared sacred silence, punctuated only by her soft breaths, the family felt a bond of love and gratitude with the Master that no words could have ever captured. 16. In the face of injustice, a dignified silence can be a source of unshakable power. This is not the silence of fear or submission, but the silence of profound self-possession. It is a refusal to stoop to the level of the accuser, a quiet testament to a truth so deep it needs no defense. It declares that one's identity and worth are anchored in a reality far beyond the grasp of false testimony and worldly judgment. It is the silence of the lion that does not concern itself with the opinion of sheep. As they walked, Thaddeus spoke of his fear of being brought before the authorities. "What will I say when they lie about us?" he asked Jesus. Jesus stopped and picked up a smooth, solid stone from the path. "When they throw waves of angry words at you, do not be the sea that roars back. Be the rock. Let their words crash against your quiet truth and break themselves. Your silence will be a testimony they cannot comprehend." 17. Silence prepares the soul for purposeful action, as a farmer tills the soil before planting. Action without reflection can be chaotic and misguided. Silence is the preparatory stage. It is the time of tilling the soil of the heart, pulling the weeds of ego and fear, and listening for guidance on where and when to plant the seeds of our labor. Action that emerges from this deep quiet is more likely to be focused, effective, and aligned with God's will. Before Jesus sent the 12 out to the villages, he didn't give them a long list of strategies. Instead, he sent them to separate, quiet places for a day. "Do not speak to one another," he instructed. "Speak to the Father. Listen. Let the noise of your own plans fall away. Go out to the people not with your own strength, but with the strength you find in the quiet. Only then will your work bear fruit." 18. To listen truly to another person, one must first possess an inner quiet. Often, when others speak, we are not truly listening. We are formulating our reply, judging their words, or waiting for our turn to talk. This inner noise prevents us from truly receiving what the other person is offering. Cultivating inner silence allows us to give the gift of our full, undivided attention, to hear the heart behind the words, and to love our neighbor as a true listener. A woman was telling a long, rambling story of her troubles to the apostles, and some were growing impatient. Later, James said to Jesus, her story had no end. Jesus replied, "It is because you were listening for an end. I was listening to her heart. To hear another, your own mind must be a quiet room, not a busy marketplace. Practice that quiet, and you will find that everyone has something beautiful to say." 19. The silence of nature is a ceaseless hymn to its creator. Jesus so often retreated into the natural world, to mountains, deserts, and seasides. He knew that creation speaks of God in its own quiet way. The steadfastness of a mountain, the vastness of the starry sky, the gentle persistence of a growing tree, these things are silent sermons. By immersing ourselves in the quiet of nature, we attune our spirits to this wordless worship and feel our own place within it. As they sat on a hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, a gentle breeze rustling the olive leaves, Jesus was quiet for a long time. Simon the Zealot, a man of action, finally asked, "Master, what are you doing?" Jesus gestured to the world around them. "I am listening," he said. "The mountain is speaking of the Father's strength. The sky is speaking of his expanse. The lilies are speaking of his care. All of creation is in constant prayer. I am simply joining in." 20. Silence strips away illusion and anchors us in fundamental truth. We live our lives surrounded by complex illusions about who we are, what we need, and what is important. These illusions are sustained by constant noise and distraction. Silence is the great dismantler. It strips away the non-essential, the superficial, the borrowed opinions, and leaves us with what is real and true: our breath, our mortality, our need for love, and the presence of God. A wealthy young man asked Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. After Jesus gave his famous reply to sell all he had, the young man walked away, sad. Peter said, "The truth was too hard for him." Jesus watched the man go. "It is not the truth that is hard," he said. "It is the letting go of the illusions." He lives in a house built of noisy possessions. I invited him into the simple, quiet room of truth, but he is not yet ready for its silence. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 21. In the quiet, we recover the name God calls us, not the labels the world gives us. From birth, the world gives us labels: smart or slow, rich or poor, successful or a failure. We can become so identified with these labels that we forget who we truly are. In the silence of prayer, these external labels fall away. We are not our job, our reputation, or our accomplishments. We are simply the beloved child of God. Silence is where we go to hear our true name spoken. Mary Magdalene was weeping by the tomb, her heart filled with the label of bereaved. When the risen Jesus appeared, he didn't give a speech. He simply spoke her name, Mary. In that one quiet word, all other labels dissolved. She was not the forsaken, not the grieving, not the sinner. She was simply Mary, known and loved. He taught his disciples, in the silence, listen for the Father to speak your name. It is the only name that tells you the whole truth of who you are. 22. Silence is the balm that heals the subtle wounds of haste. Living in a constant state of hurry creates small, invisible wounds in the soul. We become irritable, anxious, and disconnected from ourselves and others. We make mistakes, speak carelessly, and live superficially. Silence is the antidote. It is a deliberate slowing down that allows these frayed edges of the spirit to mend. It restores our sense of grace, poise, and centeredness. After a frantic day of travel, the apostles were short-tempered with one another, bickering over small things. Jesus led them to a quiet grove and simply had them sit. For a full hour, no one spoke. The tension slowly drained away, replaced by the gentle sounds of the evening. Thomas looked over at Philip and felt his earlier irritation replaced by affection. Jesus watched them and said, "The soul cannot run. When you force it to, it becomes wounded. You must always give it these moments of quiet to catch up." 23. Stillness teaches us the profound difference between being and doing. Our value in the world is often measured by our productivity, by what we do. This can lead to a restless existence where we feel we must always be busy to be worthy. Silence is a radical act of being. It teaches us that our inherent worth is not in our accomplishments, but in our existence as a creation of God. It is a time to simply be, to breathe, and to know that that is enough. Martha, even after being gently corrected before, was again busy, now weaving cloth with a frantic energy. Jesus came and sat near her, doing nothing. She felt the contrast sharply. "Lord, should I not be working?" she asked, her hands never stopping. "There is a time for work, Martha," he answered kindly, "but you work as if you are trying to earn your place at this table. In the Father's house, your place is already set. Sometimes the greatest work you can do is to simply sit still and occupy it." 24. Forgiveness is a delicate plant cultivated in the unhurried quiet of the heart. When we are wounded by others, our immediate impulse is often anger, resentment, and a noisy desire for justice. These feelings are powerful and cannot be argued away. True forgiveness requires a quiet space. It is in silence that our anger can slowly cool, that we can gain perspective, and that we can allow God's grace to soften our hearts until we are ready to let go of the debt we are holding against another. Peter came to Jesus, his heart heavy with anger at another disciple who had wronged him. "How can I forgive him?" he demanded. Jesus did not give him a command. Instead, he said, "Go to the sea when the sun rises." Do not think of the man. Do not rehearse your anger. Simply watch the water and the sky. Sit in the quiet until your own heart becomes as still as the morning glass. In that stillness, the path to forgiveness will appear. 25. When God seems silent, our own silence becomes our greatest act of faith. There are times in every spiritual journey when the heavens feel like brass and our prayers seem to go unanswered. This is the dark night of the soul. To continue to sit in the quiet during these times, to keep showing up to the meeting place even when we feel alone, is a profound statement of trust. It is faith not in a feeling but in a promise, a belief that God is present even when he is unseen and unheard. John the Baptist, imprisoned and facing death, sent his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the one, or should we expect another?" His question was filled with the agony of a silent heaven. Jesus sent them back with a message of his works, but later he said to his own disciple, "Blessed is the one who can stand in the deepest darkness, in the profoundest quiet, and still believe that the dawn is coming." That faith is a light that shines back to heaven. 26. Silence is the gateway to awe and wonder. Constant noise and information overload make the world feel ordinary and explainable. We lose our capacity for wonder. Silence clears the slate. It quiets the analytical, categorizing part of our minds and awakens the contemplative, intuitive part. In the stillness, we begin to notice the miraculous nature of ordinary things: a spider's web, the color of a flower, the warmth of the sun, and we are filled with awe. Jesus was walking with Nathanael, who was a great student of the scriptures, always analyzing and debating. Jesus stopped him and pointed to a common mustard seed on the ground. "Nathanael, your mind is full of the great words of the prophets. But can you see the promise of a great tree in this tiny seed? Can you feel the wonder of it?" he asked. "To do so, the noise of all you know must become quiet so you can stand in awe of what you do not." 27. Wisdom is born in the stillness between an impulse and a response. Folly often comes from reacting too quickly, speaking from a place of raw emotion or unexamined prejudice. Wisdom is found in the sacred pause. By cultivating the habit of inner silence, we can create a space between what happens to us and how we respond. In that brief, quiet moment, we can choose a response guided by love and insight rather than by mere impulse. James, known for his fiery temper, was about to rebuke a man who had insulted them. He saw Jesus looking at him not with disapproval but with a calm, waiting expression. James stopped, took a breath, and the heat of his anger subsided. He turned and walked away. Jesus joined him. "The first word belongs to the flesh, James," he said softly. "The second word, the one spoken after a moment of quiet, belongs to the spirit." 28. Silence is the great simplifier of a complicated life. Our lives become tangled with endless obligations, anxieties, and desires. We feel pulled in 100 different directions. Entering into silence is like stepping into a clearing in a dense forest. It allows us to see which paths are essential and which are merely distractions. It calms our tangled thoughts and helps us focus on the one thing that is truly necessary: our loving connection with God. A group of scholars came to Jesus asking him a complex web of legalistic questions about the law. He listened patiently to their convoluted arguments. Then he bent down and began to draw in the dust, saying nothing. His silence cut through their intellectual noise. When he finally spoke, he didn't answer their specific questions but addressed their hearts with a simple, profound truth. His silence had shown them that they had made a simple relationship far too complicated. 29. To embrace silence is to rebel against the world's tyranny of the urgent. The world constantly shouts that everything is urgent, that we must respond immediately to every message, every demand, every crisis. This creates a state of perpetual low-grade anxiety. Choosing to step away for a period of silence is a quiet rebellion. It is a declaration that our soul's peace is more important than the world's frantic agenda, and that we will answer first to our Creator before we answer to the chaos. A Roman official sent a messenger demanding to see Jesus immediately. The disciples were anxious, urging him to hurry. Jesus, however, finished his quiet meal. He looked at them and said, "There are two kingdoms. One shouts, 'Now!' The other whispers, 'In the fullness of time.' Do not let the urgencies of the first kingdom deafen you to the rhythms of the second." 30. The final silence is not an end, but a loving return to the quiet from which we came. We are born out of a mysterious silence, and to a mysterious silence we return. Faith teaches us not to fear this ultimate quiet, but to see it as a homecoming. The practice of silence in life is a preparation for this final peace. It allows us to become familiar with the presence of God that fills the stillness, so that when we breathe our last, we are not stepping into a frightening void, but falling into a familiar, loving, and eternal embrace. On the night before his crucifixion, Jesus took his friends to a garden. The silence under the ancient olive trees was deep and heavy. Peter whispered, "Master, it is frighteningly quiet here." Jesus looked up through the leaves at the dark sky. "Peter," he said, his voice full of a deep and certain peace, "we came from the Father's loving silence. Do not be afraid when the time comes to return to it. It is not an ending. It is home." 31. In the deep quiet, we learn to discern the voice of God from the echoes of our own desires. Our minds are filled with many voices: the voice of fear, the voice of ambition, the voice of public opinion, and the voice of our own deep-seated wants. These voices are often loud and demanding. The voice of God, however, is usually a gentle, steady, and quiet pull. To distinguish this true guidance from the clamor of our own egos, we must enter a silence deep enough that the loud echoes fade, allowing the quiet, persistent whisper of the Spirit to be heard. Philip came to Jesus brimming with excitement. "Master, I have a plan. We should go east to the great cities of Parthia. Imagine the crowds we could reach." Jesus listened, then gestured for Philip to sit. "Your heart is full of a good fire, Philip. But is it a fire you lit yourself or one the Father lit for you? Go, spend the day by the quietest part of the river. Listen to the water. When you return, tell me which voice you hear when all other sounds have faded." 32. The focused silence of a craftsman at his work is a form of prayer. Before his ministry, Jesus was a carpenter. The long hours in his workshop were filled not with empty quiet, but with a deep, focused sense. The concentration required to shape wood, to respect its grain, to measure with care, to join pieces seamlessly, is a wordless prayer. It is an act of co-creation with God, bringing order and beauty out of raw material. This teaches us that any work done with mindful, silent presence can be a holy offering. A young boy from Nazareth, whose father had commissioned a new yoke, watched Jesus work. The boy was used to the noise of other workshops, cursing, gossip, and hurried sounds. But Jesus' workshop was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic scrape of a plane and the soft thud of a mallet. The boy asked, "Are you not lonely with no one to talk to?" Jesus paused and ran his hand over the smooth wood. "My hands are speaking with the wood," he replied with a smile. "My heart is listening to my Father. It is a very full silence." 33. Sometimes the most profound prayer is not a petition, but a silent offering of our presence. We often think of prayer as a list of requests we bring to God, but there is a deeper form of prayer that has no words and asks for nothing. It is the simple, silent act of presenting ourselves to God as we are, tired, joyful, confused, or at peace. This silent offering of our being is a prayer of pure relationship, a way of saying, "Here I am. I have come only to be with you." An old woman known for her piety would come to the synagogue every day and sit for an hour in the back, saying nothing. The Pharisee in charge, annoyed by her idleness, finally confronted her. "Woman, why do you sit here wasting time? The Lord has no ear for the lazy." The woman looked up, her eyes clear. At that moment, Jesus entered and overheard. He said to the Pharisee, "Do you think the Father only desires our words? This woman brings him the most precious gift of all, her quiet heart. She is not idle, she is in communion." 34. To hold another person in the quiet of your heart is a powerful form of intercession. Praying for others is not always about listing their needs to God. A deeper intercession is to bring a person to mind during our own time of silent prayer, and to simply hold them there in the presence of God's love. We picture them bathed in light, we feel God's peace surrounding them, and we offer our silent, loving attention for their well-being. This wordless prayer connects our heart to theirs in the compassionate heart of God. A man rushed to Jesus, distraught. "My brother is on a journey through a dangerous pass. I am helpless to protect him. What prayer can I say?" Jesus led the man to a quiet place. "Words cannot cross the mountains," Jesus said, "but love can. Sit, quiet your fears. In your heart, see your brother. See him not as afraid, but as held in the Father's steady hands." Hold that picture in a loving silence. Your quiet faith here will be a shield for him there. 35. A great spiritual truth must be received into a quiet heart, lest its power be scattered by immediate speech. When we experience a moment of profound revelation or a deep spiritual insight, our first impulse is often to immediately talk about it. Yet this can dissipate its energy. A great truth is like a seed. It needs to be held in the dark, quiet soil of the heart to germinate and take root. Rushing to explain it is like pulling the seed up to see if it's growing. Silence allows the truth to settle, to integrate itself into our being before we share it. After the transfiguration, as they came down the mountain, Peter, James, and John were buzzing with awe and confusion, wanting to tell everyone what they had seen, but Jesus instructed them, "Tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." He wasn't just commanding secrecy, he was teaching them a spiritual discipline. He was giving the immensity of what they had witnessed the sacred silence it needed to transform them from within. 36. Gratitude is the natural flower that blooms in the garden of a quiet mind. A heart filled with the noise of worry, complaint, and endless wanting has no room for gratitude to grow. These noisy weeds choke it out. When we intentionally quiet our minds, we begin to notice the simple gifts we otherwise overlook: the warmth of the sun, the taste of bread, the gift of breath. In the stillness, a sense of thankfulness naturally arises, not as a forced duty, but as a joyful, spontaneous response to the grace of being. Jesus was sharing a simple meal of bread and olives with his disciples, so they were all tired and grumbling about the lack of fine food. Jesus broke the bread, but before eating, he closed his eyes in silence for a long moment. When he opened them, his face was radiant. He handed them the bread. "We complain because our minds are loud with what we lack," he said. "Be quiet for a moment and you will hear your own heart thanking God for the simple miracle of this bread." 37. Silence is the posture of hopeful waiting, an active, trusting stillness. There is a difference between the empty silence of despair and the full silence of hope. When we are waiting for God to act, for a promise to be fulfilled, or for clarity to arrive, our silence is not passive. It is an active posture of trust. It is the deep, attentive quiet of the watchman on the wall, scanning the horizon for the first light of dawn, confident that it will come. The sisters of Lazarus, Martha and Mary, waited for Jesus after sending word that their brother was ill. Every passing hour of silence from the road was agonizing. Martha paced, her anxiety a loud noise. Mary sat still, her hands folded, her eyes on the horizon. When Jesus finally arrived, he said to Martha, "Your waiting was a storm of fear." Then he looked at Mary and said, "Your waiting was a prayer of trust. Both of you waited, but your silence, Mary, made room for a miracle." 38. A deliberate silence can be a gentle boundary, protecting the soul from the poison of gossip and negativity. We are often pulled into conversations that are harmful to our spirit: gossip, slander, cynical complaints, or cruel jokes. To participate is to be poisoned. To argue is often to add fuel to the fire. Choosing to remain silent in these moments is not weakness. It is the creation of a gentle but firm boundary. It is a quiet refusal to allow the darkness of others' words to enter the sanctuary of our own hearts. As Jesus and his disciples passed a group of men, the men began to mock them and shout insults. Some of the disciples reddened with anger and opened their mouths to retaliate. Jesus put a hand up, signaling for quiet. They walked on in silence, leaving the men's voices to fade behind them. Peter later asked, "Why did we not defend your honor?" Jesus replied, "Their words were like arrows. You do not catch arrows in your hands. You let them fall to the ground. Our silence was our shield." 39. Silence starves the ego, which craves the constant noise of attention and praise. The ego, the part of us that is concerned with self-image and public approval, thrives on noise. It needs to be talked about, to be praised, to be the center of attention. Silence is the ego's famine. When we retreat into quiet, when we do good deeds in secret, when we resist the urge to announce our accomplishments, we starve the ego's need for validation and instead nourish the soul, which finds its worth in God alone. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee, stood where all could see him and loudly proclaimed his piety and good works. His prayer was a performance. The other, a tax collector, stood in a quiet corner, his head bowed, saying nothing but, "God, have mercy on me." Jesus told this parable and then said, "The first man fed his ego, but his soul went away hungry. The second man, in his humble quiet, fed his soul, and the Father drew near to him." 40. To sit in compassionate silence with the suffering is to love them with the presence of God. When someone is in deep pain, our words often feel clumsy and inadequate. We offer platitudes and advice when what is truly needed is presence. To sit with a grieving person in shared silence is a profound act of love. It communicates, "I am not afraid of your pain. I will not try to fix it. I will simply be here with you in it." This quiet companionship is a vessel through which the comforting presence of God can flow. Jesus went to the home of a family whose child was gravely ill. The room was filled with the sounds of weeping and despair. Jesus didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply walked to the parents, took their hands, and sat with them. His silence was not empty. It was a deep, calming presence that absorbed their fear and held their sorrow. In that shared quiet, they found a strength they didn't know they possessed. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 41. True rest for the soul is not found in sleep, but in a conscious, wakeful stillness. Sleep refreshes the body, but a different kind of rest is needed for the soul. The soul is restored by conscious stillness, by moments of quiet meditation and prayer where we are awake and present, but free from striving and mental clutter. This is the Sabbath rest of the heart. It is in this wakeful stillness that the soul exhales its weariness and inhales the peace of God. The disciples were exhausted after a long journey. "We need to sleep for a whole day," said Peter. Jesus nodded. "Your bodies do, but your spirits need a different kind of rest." He led them to a garden by a stream. "For the next hour," he said, do not sleep. Just sit, listen to the water, feel the breeze, let your thoughts drift by like clouds. Give your souls a chance to rest in the wakeful peace of this place. 42. Silence is the space where the quiet memories of past graces can return to nourish the present moment. Our lives are filled with moments where we have clearly felt God's presence, witnessed a small miracle, or received an unexpected blessing. In the busyness of life, we forget these sacred memories. Silence is the practice of creating a space for them to resurface. As we quiet our present anxieties, these memories of past faithfulness return, not as nostalgia, but as living nourishment, reminding us of God's constant care and renewing our trust for the future. An older disciple, Barnabas, was feeling discouraged, his faith wavering. He confessed his doubts to Jesus. Jesus didn't argue with him. He said, "Go and sit under the fig tree where we first met. Do not pray for new faith. Just sit in the quiet and remember the feeling you had on that first day." Let the memory of that past grace be your prayer for today. 43. To create a space of quiet hospitality for another is to offer them a sanctuary for their soul. Hospitality is more than providing food and shelter. A deeper hospitality is offering someone a place of peace. When we create a calm, quiet atmosphere free from hurry and distraction, we give others a rare gift, a space where they can lower their defenses, quiet their own inner turmoil, and feel safe. This silent hospitality can be more restorative to a weary soul than any meal. When Jesus and his disciples arrived at the home of a poor widow, she didn't fuss over them with elaborate preparations. She simply brought them cool water to wash their feet and then sat down, her presence calm and welcoming. The house was small and bare, but it was filled with a profound peace. As they left, Andrew remarked, "We have been to richer homes, but I have never felt so rested." Jesus replied, "She did not offer us much from her pantry, but she offered us everything from her peaceful heart." 44. The silence before a great undertaking is a gathering of the soul's deepest strength. Before a major battle, a wise general does not charge forward blindly. He takes a moment of quiet to survey the field. So it is with the soul. Before confronting a great challenge, making a life-altering decision, or beginning a difficult ministry, we must first enter a period of deep silence. It is in this quiet that we gather our spiritual resources, align our will with God's, and ground ourselves in a strength that is not our own. The night before Jesus would choose his 12 apostles, a decision that would shape the future of the world, he did not convene a committee or hold a debate. The scriptures say he went out to a mountainside and spent the entire night in prayer to God. He entered the profound silence of communion, so that the choice he made in the morning would be born not of human wisdom, but of divine stillness. 45. Silence is a vessel. We must empty ourselves of our own noise to be filled with the Spirit. We cannot fill a cup that is already full. Likewise, our souls cannot be filled with the grace, wisdom, and peace of God if they are already overflowing with our own noise, our pleas, our opinions, our worries, our inner chatter. The practice of silence is the act of emptying our cup. We intentionally set aside our own contents to create a holy emptiness, a receptive space ready to be filled with the living water of the Spirit. A woman who was known for her many good works and constant activity came to Jesus feeling spiritually dry and empty. "I serve all day, but I feel no joy," she said. Jesus picked up a dusty clay jar. "This jar is useful," he said, "but it is full of dust. To fill it with fresh water, you must first take the time to empty it and clean it." He looked at her kindly. "Your service is good, but you must make time each day to be empty and quiet so the Father can fill you anew." 46. We must learn to honor the uncomfortable silences in conversation, for it is often there that truth seeks to emerge. In our conversations, we fear the pause. When a moment of silence falls, we rush to fill it with trivialities. But these pauses are often sacred spaces. They are moments where a person is gathering the courage to say something vulnerable, or where a difficult truth is hovering in the air, waiting for a gentle space to land. To honor that silence, to simply wait in it without panic, is to allow for a deeper and more honest connection. A young man came to Jesus wanting to become a disciple. Jesus asked him a piercing question about his love for his wealth. The young man fell silent, his face a canvas of conflict. The other disciples grew restless, wanting him to answer. But Jesus simply waited, honoring the man's silent struggle. He didn't rush him or provide an easy answer. He gave him the gift of a respectful silence in which to confront his own heart. 47. All of creation works in a patient, powerful silence. The seed in the earth, the child in the womb, the star in the sky. The most powerful and creative forces in the universe do their work in silence. A seed does not make a sound as it becomes a mighty tree. A child is formed in the sacred quiet of the womb. The stars move across the heavens in a majestic silence. This teaches us that our own spiritual growth and the most important work God does in us often happen quietly, beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, in the patient and hidden places of the soul. Looking at the great temple in Jerusalem, a disciple said, "Master, what a glorious noise of worship." But Jesus led him out of the city to a field where a farmer was sowing grain. "You are impressed by the loud temple," Jesus said, "but I am in awe of this. The shouts in the temple will fade, but the silent, patient work of this tiny seed will one day feed a family." Never forget that the Father's greatest work is almost always silent. 48. Silence is the acceptance of divine mystery, an acknowledgement that our words fall short of God's greatness. The human mind wants to define, categorize, and explain everything, including God. But God is ultimately a mystery far beyond our comprehension. There comes a point where our words, our doctrines, and our theologies are no longer adequate. At this point, the only authentic response is a humble, reverent silence. It is an act of worship that honors the isness of God without trying to confine him within the small boxes of our language. Nicodemus, a man of great learning, came to Jesus at night, his mind full of complex questions about rebirth and the Spirit. Jesus answered him with metaphors of wind and birth. Seeing the frustration on the scholar's face, Jesus said, "You are trying to build a ladder of words to climb to God, Nicodemus. There are some heights you can only reach by falling silent and allowing the mystery to hold you." 49. The rhythm of grace includes the tiny silent pauses between our very breaths and thoughts. We often seek silence only in grand gestures, a long retreat, or a dedicated hour of prayer. But Jesus invites us to find it in the mustard seed moments as well. There is a sacred pause at the end of every exhalation before we inhale again. There is a sliver of stillness between our thoughts. By learning to notice and inhabit these tiny, ever-present moments of silence, we can weave a thread of peace and mindfulness through our entire day. A woman who had 12 children told Jesus she had no time for quiet prayer. "My home is never silent," she laughed. Jesus smiled and said, "The Father does not ask for an hour you do not have. He only asks for the spaces in between. When you stir the soup, find the quiet between the stirs. When you breathe, find the stillness between the breaths. God lives in those small silences waiting for you." 50. Silence is the native language of eternity, and in practicing it, we learn to speak the tongue of our true home. On earth, we use clumsy words to try to communicate the love and truth that is in our hearts. We are often misunderstood. The promise of heaven is a promise of perfect communion, a state in which we will know and be known completely. This is a communion that transcends words. In eternity, the language will be a silent, direct from the heart knowing. Every time we enter into deep, loving silence on earth, we are practicing the language of our eternal home. On a clear night, Jesus and John were looking up at the stars. John, a man of deep love, said, "Master, will we speak of all this in the kingdom?" Jesus put an arm around his beloved disciple. "Oh, John," he said softly, "where we are going, we will not need to speak of love. We will simply be in it. Our hearts will understand each other in a way that words cannot touch. It will be a joyful, loving silence, and it will feel like we have finally come home." 51. True surrender is a silent act of the will, a quiet letting go of our frantic grip on control. We often think of surrender as a loud, dramatic event, a cry of "I give up." But true spiritual surrender is most often a silent, internal release. It is the quiet decision to stop fighting, to stop forcing our own solutions, and to unclench our fists from around a problem. In that silent, open-handed posture, we create the space for God's grace to work, trusting that His hands are more capable than our own. Andrew had been casting his nets for hours on the same side of the boat, his muscles straining, his frustration growing with each empty pull. "There are no fish here!" he finally shouted. Jesus, who had been watching silently from the shore, called out, "Then stop!" Andrew, exasperated, let the net drop. For a long moment, the only sound was the lapping of the water. In that quiet, his frantic energy subsided. "Now," Jesus' voice came again, gentle and calm. "Try the other side." The silent act of ceasing his own effort was the necessary prelude to the miracle. 52. The ability to remain peaceful in a long silence is a measure of our faith's true depth. It is easy to be faithful when prayers are answered quickly and God's presence feels immediate. But the true test of faith comes in the long silences, in the periods of waiting where nothing seems to be happening. To be able to sit in that quiet without panicking, to continue to trust in the goodness of God even when the heavens are silent, shows that our faith is not built on feelings or results, but on a deep, abiding relationship. A man whose daughter was ill came to Jesus, who healed her with a touch. A week later, the man returned. "She is well," he said, "but now I am afraid. I felt your power, but what happens when I pray and feel nothing?" Jesus led him to a field where a farmer sat, watching his newly planted ground. "That farmer," Jesus said, "put his seeds in the earth. Now he waits. He does not see them growing. He does not feel them moving. But he sits in peaceful trust because he knows the nature of the soil and the sun. Your faith must be like his, a peaceful quiet that trusts in the nature of the Father, even when you cannot see him work." 53. Our words and actions are the notes, but silence is the space between them that creates the music of a holy life. A song that is all notes, with no rests, is just noise. The silence between the notes gives them rhythm, melody, and meaning. So it is with our lives. A life that is all action and all words, with no moments of quiet pause, becomes a frantic, meaningless cacophony. The deliberate practice of silence provides the rests, the pauses, that give our actions grace, our words wisdom, and our entire life a beautiful, holy rhythm. Lydia, a new follower, was zealous. She spoke constantly of the Lord, worked tirelessly, and never seemed to stop. She came to Jesus confessing, "I feel I am making a lot of noise, but no beautiful music for God." Jesus smiled. A musician who loves his harp does not only strike the strings, he also touches them to bring them to silence. He knows the silence is part of the song. Go, and for every word you speak of God today, honor him with a moment of quiet. You will find your melody. 54. Silence dissolves the persona we present to the world, allowing our authentic God-given self to emerge. From a young age, we learn to wear masks to build a persona that will be acceptable to others. We become the responsible one, the funny one, the successful one. This persona is sustained by the noise of performance and the feedback of others. In silence, there is no one to perform for. The mask begins to feel heavy and useless. In the quiet, we can let it fall and rediscover the simple, vulnerable, and beloved self that God created before the world gave us a role to play. After Zacchaeus had his life-changing meal with Jesus, people still pointed and whispered, "There is the sinner, the tax collector." At first, he would either puff up with his old pride or shrink with his new shame. He told Jesus, "I do not know who I am." Jesus replied, "That is because you are still listening to their noise. Go home, sit in the quietest room of your house where no one can see you. The man you are when you are all alone with the Father. That is who you truly are. Go and get to know him." 55. The most profound obedience is often a quiet, immediate turning of the feet, not a loud declaration of intent. When we feel a call from God, our first instinct might be to make a grand, verbal promise. "Yes, Lord, I will do it." But words can be cheap. A deeper, more authentic obedience is often silent. It is the quiet closing of a book, the immediate standing up from a chair, the silent turning of our feet in the direction we are called to go. This wordless action is a prayer of trust that speaks louder than any vow. When Jesus walked by the sea and saw Simon and Andrew casting their nets, he said two simple words, "Follow me." The scripture notes their response was not verbal. It says they at once left their nets and followed him. There was no negotiation, no loud proclamation. There was only the quiet, decisive sound of nets dropping into a boat and the soft crunch of sandals on the sand, turning to walk a new path. That silent action was the beginning of everything. 56. Stillness acts as a sieve for the mind, allowing trivial and anxious thoughts to fall away, leaving only what is substantial. Our minds are like a person holding a great handful of soil and stones. The stones are the solid, important truths, while the soil is the constant stream of trivial worries, fleeting anxieties, and useless chatter. The practice of stillness is like gently shaking that handful. The loose soil of our trivial thoughts begins to sift through our fingers, blown away by the quiet until all we are left holding are the few solid stones of what truly matters. A disciple came to Jesus, his face creased with 100 small worries. "My mind is a swarm of gnats, Master. I worry about my family, my business, what people think, tomorrow's bread." Jesus led him to a windswept hill. "Stand here," he said, "and do not fight the gnats. Just be still. Feel the wind. Watch the clouds." After a time, the disciple's breathing slowed. "The gnats are gone," he said in wonder. Jesus replied, "They were not real enough to remain in the great quiet of God's world." 57. Silence is the womb of holy creativity, where God can plant a new idea, a new ministry, a new song in the heart. We cannot create and consume at the same time. A life filled with constant input, noise, information, conversation, leaves no room for new divine ideas to be born. Silence creates a receptive emptiness, a fertile darkness like the womb. It is in this protected, quiet space that the Holy Spirit can plant a seed, a new way to love, a new solution to an old problem, a new song of praise, and nurture it until it is strong enough to be brought into the light of the world. Mary of Magdala wanted to do a great work for the Lord, but she did not know what it should be. She kept trying to invent plans, each one more complicated than the last. She brought her frustration to Jesus. "Let go of your own plans," he told her gently. "Your mind is a busy, crowded inn. There is no room for a holy birth. For one moon, simply spend time in quiet. Make your heart a silent manger. Wait and see what the Father will place there." 58. We must give ourselves the same silent, non-judgmental space to heal that we would offer to another. When a friend is hurting, we often know that the best gift we can give is our quiet, compassionate presence. We don't judge them or rush them. Yet when we ourselves have failed or are in pain, we fill our own minds with the noise of self-recrimination and impatient demands to get over it. To heal, we must learn to offer ourselves the same grace, to sit with our own pain in a silent, non-judgmental space, allowing God's quiet healing to take place within. After Peter denied Jesus, his heart was a storm of noisy shame. He could not pray. His mind only shouted his failure at him. After the resurrection, Jesus met him by the shore. He didn't lecture Peter. He asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And in the quiet space between each question, he gave Peter's soul the silent room it needed to heal the 3 wounds of his denial. It was a silence that offered forgiveness before the apology was even made. 59. In the quiet, we practice a gentle detachment, loosening our anxious grasp on the outcomes we cannot control. Much of our anxiety comes from trying to control things that are ultimately beyond our control. The opinions of others, the events of the future, the health of our loved ones. Silence is a school for detachment. In the quiet, we can consciously name our attachments and our fears and then practice handing them over to God. It is a silent exercise in loosening our grip, learning to trust that the universe is held in loving hands, not our own. James and John were anxiously watching the sky, worrying that a lack of rain would spoil the harvest. Their prayers were frantic and demanding. Jesus came and sat with them. He said nothing, simply watching the clouds with them in a calm, patient silence. His peace was so profound that it slowly quieted their own anxiety. "Your prayers were a noisy grasping," he said at last. "Let us now pray a quiet prayer of trust and be at peace whether the rain comes or not." 60. The greatest journey is learning to be peacefully at home in the quiet of our own company, for it is there we find we are never truly alone. Many people seek constant noise and company because they are afraid of the person they will meet when they are all alone. They fear their own emptiness. The path of faith is a journey inward, a journey to befriend oneself. When we learn to sit peacefully in the quiet of our own company, without needing distraction, we make a profound discovery. The silence is not empty at all. It is filled with the loving presence of God. Loneliness is cured from the inside out. A young man named Silas followed the disciples, but always stayed at the center of the group, afraid to be left at the edges. "I am afraid of being alone," he confessed to Jesus. Jesus replied, "It is because you are a stranger to yourself. Tonight, instead of sleeping in the tent, take your blanket and find a place by yourself. Introduce your heart to the Father. When you learn to enjoy the quiet company of the one who lives within you, you will never feel alone in a crowd again." Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 61. A place is made holy not by stones and gold, but by the accumulated weight of prayerful silence offered within it. We think of holy places as grand temples or beautiful cathedrals, but what truly sanctifies a space is the quality of attention that is paid to God there. A simple room, a quiet corner of a garden, or a single chair can become a thin place, a portal to the sacred, if it is consistently consecrated with the offering of prayerful silence. The silent, heartfelt attention of one person can fill a space with a holiness that lingers long after they are gone. The disciples were impressed by the grandeur of the temple. "Look at these mighty stones," they exclaimed. Jesus looked around and then said, "The Father is pleased with this place. But I tell you, the quiet corner of the widow's house where she whispers her trust each morning is just as holy. The stone by the well where Jacob dreamed is sanctified ground. Holiness is not in the building, it is in the silent turning of a heart toward heaven." 62. A single truth spoken into a quiet, listening heart has more power to change a life than a sermon shouted to a distracted crowd. We often believe that to have an impact, we must be loud and reach the masses. We value volume and scale, but spiritual transformation is a quiet, intimate process. A single simple truth: you are loved, you are forgiven, do not be afraid. When spoken softly into a heart that has been prepared by silence, can take root and change everything. One quiet, heartfelt conversation can have more eternal weight than 1,000 noisy speeches. Jesus often drew one person away from the clamor of the crowd to heal or speak to them. He took the deaf man aside to heal him in private. He spoke to Nicodemus alone at night. He met the woman at the well when no one else was around. He understood that the soul is like a timid bird. It will not come out to receive the food of truth amidst a great noise, but only in a place of gentle, trusting quiet. 63. The humble silence of "I do not know" is more sacred than an answer spoken in pride. Our world values certainty and expertise. We feel pressure to have an opinion on everything, to have all the answers. But spiritual maturity involves embracing mystery, the ability to sit quietly in the face of an unanswerable question. To admit "I do not know" without anxiety is an act of profound humility. It is a silence that honors God's greatness and our own creaturely limits, and it is a holier state than providing a confident answer born of pride. A group of Sadducees tried to trap Jesus with a clever question about the resurrection. They had an answer for everything, a legalistic system that left no room for mystery. Jesus answered them, but then turned to his disciples and said, "Beware the pride of a mind that has no room for silence. The wisest man is not he who has all the answers, but he who knows when to fall quiet before the greatness of God." 64. The quiet, joyful presence of a community of faith is its most powerful witness against a loud and fearful world. Often we think of evangelism as loud preaching or clever arguments. But perhaps the most compelling witness is a community of people who simply live differently. A group of people who are not anxious, who are not driven by greed or fear, who treat each other with a quiet kindness and who possess a deep inner peace. This collective, joyful silence is so strange, so attractive to a noisy and chaotic world, that it wordlessly proclaims the reality of the kingdom of God. As the early followers of Jesus gathered, they were noted for their strange habits. They shared their possessions quietly. They cared for the poor without seeking recognition, and they faced persecution with a calm that unnerved their accusers. A Roman official observing them said, "I do not understand their words, but their peace is a louder argument than any speech. They live as if they hear a different music." 65. Even in the midst of great physical pain, there is a quiet center in the soul that can remain a place of peace. Pain is a loud, demanding tyrant. It screams for our full attention and can drown out everything else. But faith teaches that our identity is not our body. Deep within us, beneath the level of physical sensation, is a center of quiet consciousness, the eye that observes the pain. With practice, we can learn to retreat to this silent center, acknowledging the pain without being completely consumed by it, and find a profound peace even in the heart of suffering. A woman who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years came to Jesus. Her life was a constant noise of pain, shame, and doctors' failed pronouncements. In a moment of desperate faith, she reached out and touched his cloak. The healing was immediate, but Jesus turned and asked, "Who touched me?" He was looking for the woman whose silent faith had reached out from the quiet center of her soul, even when her body was screaming in agony. 66. The silence that follows a great trial is a holy ground, the soft earth where the roots of new life begin to grow. After a storm passes, there is an almost sacred quiet. The wind is gone, The rain has stopped and the world seems to be holding its breath. So it is with the soul. After a period of intense struggle, grief, or turmoil, there comes a time of exhausted, tender silence. We should not rush to fill this quiet. It is a holy, fallow ground. It is the soft, rain-soaked earth where God is silently preparing the roots of our next season of growth. After Jesus was crucified, a great, heavy silence fell over his followers. Their hopes were shattered, their leader was gone. The Sabbath that followed was a day of profound, sorrowful quiet. They did not know it, but this silence was not an ending. It was the necessary pause, the deep, dark, fertile ground of Saturday that made the explosive new life of Sunday morning possible. 67. In the quiet of our prayer, we can feel the silent, loving presence of that great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us. We are not alone on our journey of faith. We are part of a vast communion that stretches through time, surrounded by the saints and our own loved ones who have completed their race in deep contemplative silence. When the boundary between heaven and earth seems to thin, we can sometimes feel their presence. It is not a ghostly haunting, but a silent, loving encouragement, a quiet cheering from the sidelines, reminding us that we are part of a great and eternal family. As Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, his human spirit overwhelmed with sorrow, the scripture says that an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. He was not left alone in his anguish. This reveals a profound truth. In our moments of deepest, most solitary trial, if we quiet our fears, we may become aware of the silent, strengthening presence of that heavenly company sent by the Father to attend to us. 68. Silence is a return to the wide-eyed wonder of a child, before the world taught us to fill every moment with labels and judgments. A small child can look at a flower for 10 minutes, not thinking that is a rose, but simply experiencing its roseness, its color, its shape, its scent. As we grow, we learn to replace this direct experience with a noisy internal monologue of labels, comparisons, and judgments. The practice of silence is an attempt to unlearn this habit. It is a way of quieting the labeling mind and returning to a childlike state of pure, wordless wonder at the world God has made. Jesus took a little child and placed him in the midst of his disciples. "Unless you change and become like little children," he said, "you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." He wasn't just speaking of humility, but also of perception. A child's mind is quiet. They do not analyze, they receive. To enter the kingdom is to learn to quiet our own noisy adult minds and receive the gift of the present moment with the same silent, wide-eyed wonder. 69. There is a silence born not of emptiness, but of a heart so full of love or joy that words would only diminish it. We tend to associate silence with lack or solemnity. But there is another kind of silence, the silence of joyful overflow. It is the quiet gaze between two people who are deeply in love, the awestruck stillness of watching a glorious sunset, or the peaceful quiet after receiving an overwhelming gift of grace. In these moments, the heart is too full for words. To speak would be to shrink the experience. Silence is the only vessel large enough to hold such fullness. When Mary, the mother of Jesus, was visited by the shepherds and heard their incredible story, the scripture says she did not run around telling everyone. Instead, it says, she treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. Her silence was not one of confusion, but of fullness. Her heart was so filled with the wonder of God's work that she protected it with a sacred, treasuring quiet. 70. The ultimate act of faith is the final, silent entrusting of our spirit into the Father's hands, our last wordless yes. A life of practicing silence is a preparation for our final moment. After all the words have been said, after all the struggles and joys, life comes down to one last silent act of trust. It is the quiet release of our own spirit, a wordless surrender into the mystery of God's love. It is the culmination of a lifetime of small, silent yeses, culminating in the final peaceful letting go, trusting that the silence we are entering is not a void, but the loving embrace of home. In his final moments on the cross, after all the agonized cries and the words of forgiveness, Jesus' last utterance was one of trust. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And then he fell silent. This was the ultimate silence, the final letting go, the perfect act of faith that bridged the gap between life and life everlasting, showing all who would follow him how to make their own final peace. 71. The silence of unanswered prayer is an invitation to trust the giver more than the gift we are asking for. When our heartfelt prayers are met with silence, it can feel like abandonment. We may question God's love or power, but this silence can also be a profound and difficult invitation. It asks us to shift our focus from the specific outcome we desire to the nature of the God to whom we are praying. It is a call to trust in his goodness, wisdom, and love, even when we do not understand his ways, and to find our peace in relationship with him, not in the receiving of our requests. The Canaanite woman who pleaded for her daughter was at first met with a confounding silence from Jesus. He did not immediately answer her cries. The disciples wanted to send her away, but her faith did not waver in the face of that silence. She did not demand an answer. She simply persisted in her trust of his inherent goodness. Her ability to remain faithful in that quiet moment of seeming rejection was the very thing that unlocked the miracle. 72. True courage is not the absence of fear's noisy voice, but the ability to act from the quiet center that lies beneath it. Fear is a loud, clamoring voice in the mind. It shouts with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Courage is not about silencing that voice. Sometimes we cannot. Instead, courage is about accessing a place of deeper quiet within ourselves, a center of trust and conviction that is separate from the noise of fear. It is the ability to hear the gentle whisper of "do not be afraid," even while the storm of anxiety rages. As the disciples prepared to go into a town known for its hostility, Thomas confessed his fear to Jesus. "My heart is loud with it, Master. I hear it telling me to run." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not fight the noise, Thomas. Listen deeper. Beneath the clamor of your fear, there is a quiet place where my Father dwells with you. Find that stillness, listen to it. Then let that quiet part of you decide where your feet will go." 73. A lie cannot long survive in the presence of a calm, loving sense. It withers for lack of an argument to feed on. Lies, accusations, and gossip thrive on engagement. They are designed to provoke a noisy reaction, a defense, an argument, a counterattack, which gives them energy and legitimacy. A calm, non-anxious, loving silence offers them nothing to push against. It is like a flame deprived of oxygen. The lie is simply left to hang in the air, exposed in its own ugliness, and it often collapses under the weight of its own falsehood. When the Pharisees brought the woman caught in adultery to Jesus, they filled the air with the noise of accusation and legalistic argument. They demanded a response, but Jesus met their clamor with silence, bending down to write in the dust. His refusal to engage in their noisy trap created a profound, uncomfortable quiet. In that silence, their self-righteousness was exposed, and one by one they trickled away, their lie undone not by a counter-argument but by a holy hush. 74. The silence of the body is the gateway to the silence of the soul. To still the mind, first still the hands and feet. The mind and body are deeply connected. A restless body, fidgeting, pacing, constantly moving, often reflects and encourages a restless mind. To find inner quiet, the first step is often to find outer quiet. By intentionally stilling the body by sitting or standing in a posture of relaxed attentiveness, we send a signal to the mind that it is safe to slow down. The physical act of stillness becomes an invitation for the soul to enter its own rest. A young disciple named Mark struggled to pray, saying his thoughts were like a flock of scattered birds. Jesus told him, "You cannot tame the birds by shouting at them. First, you must still the tree they wish to land in." He guided the young man to sit at the base of an old olive tree. For the next quarter hour, do not try to quiet your thoughts. Just try to quiet your body. Do not move a single finger. Be as still as this tree. Your quiet body will become a home where your scattered thoughts can finally come to rest. 75. The authority of Jesus was rooted in his deep inner silence, which made his words weigh more than the shouts of others. The scribes and Pharisees derived their authority from external sources, from books, traditions, and loud proclamations. But the people recognized that Jesus' authority was different. It was an internal authority that came from his deep, unbroken communion with the Father. His words emerged from a profound inner silence, and so they carried the weight of truth itself. It was the quiet of the wellspring that made the water he offered so life-giving. The scripture says that when Jesus taught in the synagogue, the people were astonished, for he taught them as one who had authority and not as the scribes. The scribes quoted and debated, their words a complex noise. Jesus often spoke simply with long pauses. His silence gave his words room to land in the hearts of his listeners. The authority was not in the volume of his speech, but in the profound divine stillness from which it came. 76. Quiet contemplation is the soil from which prophetic imagination springs, allowing us to envision the world as God dreams for it to be. To be a prophet is not just to predict the future, but to see the present with God's eyes and to imagine a future aligned with God's will, the kingdom of heaven. This kind of holy imagination cannot be born in a noisy, cynical mind. It requires a deep, contemplative silence. In the quiet, we can let go of what is and become receptive to the divine vision of what could be, allowing God's dream for a world of justice, peace, and love to take root in our hearts. John the Beloved would often sit apart from the others, gazing into the distance, his heart in a state of quiet reverie. Peter, a man of action, would sometimes chide him. "Why are you dreaming, John? There is work to do." Jesus, overhearing, once said, "Peter, you are a rock on which I will build my church." But John is a window through which we will see the New Jerusalem. Every builder needs a dreamer who has been quiet enough to see the plans. 77. The comfortable silence between friends engaged in shared, meaningful work is a quiet hymn of communion. True friendship does not need to be filled with constant talk. One of its deepest expressions is the ability to work alongside one another in a comfortable, easy silence. The shared focus, the common goal, the unspoken understanding, this creates a bond deeper than conversation. It is a silent prayer of fellowship, a wordless hymn of mutual respect and quiet affection. Jesus often worked alongside his disciples, mending nets, preparing a meal, or securing a boat. In these moments, long stretches would pass without a word. Yet the disciples would later recall these times as moments of profound connection with their master. The shared rhythmic work of their hands created a silent harmony of purpose that was more intimate than many of the lessons he taught with his words. 78. Choosing a quiet response to an insult is not weakness. It is the strength that breaks the cycle of retaliation. The world's logic is an eye for an eye. An insult is met with an insult. A blow is met with a blow. This creates an endless, noisy cycle of violence and bitterness. The teaching to turn the other cheek is a call to a radical, powerful silence. It's the choice to absorb the force of the insult without returning it, to refuse to participate in the cycle. This quiet act of non-retaliation is not passive. It is an active, courageous choice that introduces the possibility of peace into a situation of conflict. A merchant in the market, angry about a price, spat an insult at Matthew. The old Matthew would have unleashed a torrent of abuse, but the new Matthew simply looked at the man, his eyes full of a strange sadness, and said nothing. The merchant, expecting a fight, was baffled by the silence. He postured for a moment, then, finding no fuel for his fire, he shuffled away in confusion. The silence had disarmed him more than any angry word could have. 79. Silence is a disciplined shield for the heart, protecting our inner peace from the relentless onslaught of the world's despair. The world constantly broadcasts messages of fear, crisis, and despair. If we leave the gates of our minds open, this noise will invade and colonize our inner world, stealing our peace and hope. A disciplined practice of silence, deliberately turning off the noise of the world for a period each day, is not an act of ignorance, but of spiritual self-preservation. It is like raising a shield, allowing the heart to remain a quiet, protected space where hope and love can still flourish. Mary of Bethany, who so loved to sit at Jesus' feet, was often criticized for being withdrawn from the world's urgent affairs. Her sister Martha would worry loudly about many things. But Mary's quiet practice gave her a serene strength. When the great crisis of Lazarus' death arrived, Martha's faith was a flurry of anxious words, but Mary's was a deep, quiet trust. Her silence had been her shield and her training. 80. To truly study the Word of God, one must move beyond the noise of analysis to the deep silence where the Word can speak to the heart. Reading Scripture can be a noisy, intellectual activity. Analyzing texts, debating meanings, cross-referencing passages. This is valuable, but it is not the same as receiving the Word of God. To truly let the Scripture read us, we must create a space of inner silence after we have read. We must hold the Word in our hearts as Mary did, and ponder it quietly, allowing the Holy Spirit to illuminate its meaning for our own lives. Moving it from the head to the heart. A learned scribe came to test Jesus, quoting Scripture with great expertise. He knew the letters of the law, but not its spirit. Jesus responded with a simple parable. Later, he explained to his disciples, "That man's mind is a library full of noisy scrolls. He has read everything, but he has heard nothing. You must read the Word, and then you must be silent and let the Word read you." Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 81. Spiritual maturity is marked by a growing comfort with silence and a lessening need for the noise of constant validation. A child constantly asks, "Are you watching me? Am I doing it right?" They need external validation to feel secure. Spiritual immaturity is similar. It is a restless need for attention, for praise, for others to notice our piety or good works. As we mature in faith, our security becomes rooted in our identity as God's beloved children. We no longer need the noise of external approval. We find a quiet confidence and a deep comfort in simply being, our worth assured in the silent love of the Father. The disciples were once arguing about which of them was the greatest, a noisy debate born of insecurity. Jesus placed a child before them as a model of humility. He was also a model of being. A child at peace does not need to announce their worth. As the disciples grew after Pentecost, their letters were less about their own status and more about Christ. They had found their worth in Him and no longer needed the noise of self-promotion. 82. The most profound healing can come in a moment of silence when we feel completely seen and understood by the eyes of love. More than any physical ailment, the deepest human wound is the feeling of being unseen, unknown, and unloved. Words of comfort can help, but the most profound healing occurs in a moment of pure, silent connection, to be looked upon by another and ultimately by God with eyes that see all of our flaws and failures and yet still radiate complete love and acceptance, is a silent experience that can mend the most broken parts of the soul. When Jesus met the woman at the well, he spoke to her of the facts of her life, her 5 husbands, the man she was with. He saw her completely, but the true miracle was not in his knowledge, but in his gaze. He saw all of her shame, and yet he did not look away. He looked at her with love. In that silent, accepting gaze, the shame that had defined her life dissolved, and she ran back to her town, healed and whole. 83. In the challenging silence, we can face the restless cravings that drive our addictions, and there find the presence of a deeper strength. Addictive and compulsive behaviors are often a way to flee from an uncomfortable inner silence. We use substances, distractions, or busyness to drown out the restless cravings and anxieties that surface when we are still. To choose to sit in that uncomfortable silence, to face the craving without acting on it, is an act of immense courage. It is in that quiet, vulnerable space that we discover we are not alone with our weakness, and that the presence of God is a strength made perfect in that very place. Jesus, when he was driven into the wilderness, faced his temptations in a vast and profound silence. He did not distract himself. He sat with the raw cravings of his humanity for food, for power, for worldly glory. It was in the silence of the desert, by facing the noise within, that he found the clarity and strength of the Spirit to say no, rooting his identity firmly in his relationship with the Father. 84. The quiet of the Sabbath is not an empty inactivity, but a joyful and deliberate silence in which we delight in God and his creation. The Sabbath is not just about stopping work. It is about entering a different kind of reality. It is a deliberate quieting of the noise of production, striving, and accomplishment. This quiet is not empty or boring. It is a full, joyful sense meant for delight. It is the quiet of watching a sunset, of enjoying a meal with loved ones, of walking in nature, of simply being present to the goodness of God and his creation without any agenda. It is a silence that restores the soul. Jesus often healed on the Sabbath, angering the Pharisees who saw it only as a day of knots. To them, its silence was defined by restriction. But Jesus showed them that the Sabbath's quiet was meant for restoration and joy. The Sabbath was made for man, he said, revealing that its sacred silence was not a burden to be endured, but a gift of joyful, restorative peace to be received. 85. Silence clarifies our vocation, quieting the world's demands of what we should do, so we can hear God's whisper of who we are to be. The world is constantly shouting at us about what we should do to be successful, valuable, or important. These noisy demands can easily drown out our true calling. Our vocation is found not in what the world wants from us, but in the place where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. To find this place, we must enter the silence. In the quiet, we can let go of the world's shoulds and listen for God's gentle whisper about who he created us to be at our core. A young, wealthy ruler came to Jesus listing all the things he did. He followed all the commandments. He had a perfect resume, but Jesus invited him to a deeper identity. Go, sell what you possess, and follow me. This was an invitation to let go of the noisy identity of wealthy, successful man, and to enter the quiet, uncertain, but far more authentic vocation of simply being a follower, discovering who he was in relationship with the Master. 86. A quiet, compassionate touch can speak a volume of love and comfort that words could never convey. Language has its limits, especially in moments of great joy or deep sorrow. At these times, a silent gesture of physical connection, a hand on a shoulder, A shared embrace, the washing of feet, can communicate love, forgiveness, and solidarity in a way that is far more direct and powerful than speech. This loving silence of the body bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to the heart. At the Last Supper, in a room filled with the heavy silence of impending betrayal and sorrow, Jesus did not give a long speech on humility. He took off his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, and silently washed his disciples' feet. That quiet, humble act of service spoke more about the nature of his love and the meaning of his kingdom than any sermon could have. It was a lesson taught in the eloquent language of silent, loving touch. 87. Silence allows the soul's deepest groans and longings, those prayers too deep for words, to rise to the surface and be known by God. Beneath the surface of our conscious thoughts and articulate prayers, there is a deeper level of our being that is constantly in communion with God. The Spirit within us, as Paul would later write, intercedes with groanings too deep for words. We only become aware of these profound, formless longings of our soul when we become quiet. Silence is the act of listening to our own deepest heart, allowing its raw, wordless prayers to be acknowledged and offered up. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus fell on his face, his prayer a raw agony of spirit. The words recorded are few, but the prayer itself was an ocean of feeling. His sweat falling like drops of blood was a testament to a prayer that went far beyond language. It was the silent, agonizing groaning of his soul in perfect communion with the Father's will. A prayer of being, not of words. 88. By quieting our own inner commentary, we learn to see other people not through our own judgments, but as they truly are. When we meet someone, we rarely just see them. We see them through a noisy filter of our own past experiences, biases, and judgments. Our inner narrator is constantly labeling, "He is arrogant, she is weak, they are not like us." The discipline of silence is about learning to quiet that inner narrator. When we can look at another person from a place of inner stillness, we can begin to see them as they are, a complex, wounded, beloved child of God, not just the character in our own story. The disciples saw the children as a noisy interruption. Their inner commentary said, "They are a nuisance, send them away." But Jesus, from his place of inner quiet, saw them differently. He saw them not as interruptions, but as icons of the kingdom. He silenced the disciples' noisy judgments to show them the silent truth of who the children really were. 89. There is a creative silence for planting seeds of intention and a patient silence for awaiting the harvest. Wisdom is knowing the season. Silence is not a monolithic reality. Its quality changes with the seasons of the soul. There is the silence of winter, a deep, fallow rest. There is the silence of early spring, full of unseen generative activity as seeds are planted. And there is the silence of late summer, a patient, watchful waiting for the harvest. Spiritual wisdom is the art of discerning what season we are in and honoring the quality of silence that it requires. Jesus spoke often in parables of farming. He knew that a farmer cannot be in a hurry. The farmer's work is punctuated by different kinds of quiet. The focused silence of sowing, the long, patient silence of waiting for growth, and the watchful silence of looking for the signs of harvest. Jesus taught his disciples that the work of the kingdom follows these same sacred silent rhythms. 90. Beneath the noise of the created world is a fundamental creative silence, and in our own quiet we touch the very ground of being. Physicists speak of the vacuum of space, but mystics speak of a vibrant, creative stillness that underlies all of existence. This is not an empty void, but the silent, loving presence of God from which all things emerge and by which all things are sustained. Every sound, from the song of a bird to the cry of a city, is born out of this silence and will return to it. When we enter our own deep inner quiet, we are not creating something new. We are simply becoming attuned to the fundamental silence that is always and already there, the very ground of our being. One night, Jesus led Peter, James, and John high up on a mountain. The world below was a distant murmur. Up there, the silence was vast and profound, broken only by the wind. "Listen," Jesus whispered, though there was nothing to hear. "Do not listen to the wind, but to the silence the wind moves through. That is the Father's breath. That is what holds the stars in place. Be still and feel it holding you too." Hello, dear friends, and peace be with you. Thank you for walking this quiet path with us today. We've journeyed together through many doorways into the heart of stillness, exploring it not as an empty void, but as the warm, loving presence of God. Each philosophy is simply another way of saying that you are invited into a deeper, more intimate friendship with Jesus, away from the noise and hurry of the world. This isn't about mastering a set of rules, but about accepting a gentle invitation to come home to the sanctuary you carry within your own heart. Share your journey with us. Now we invite you to continue the conversation. The most beautiful part of our Jesus and Me community is hearing how God is moving in your own life. Our call to action for you is simple. In the comments below, please share which one of these philosophies on silence resonated most deeply with you. Was there a story or an idea that felt like it was meant just for you today? How do you find your own quiet space to connect with the Lord? Your testimony could be the very thing that encourages another member of our family here to seek that peace for themselves. And of course, if this time of reflection has been a blessing to you, please like this video, subscribe for more content that feeds the soul, and share it with someone you know who might need a moment of quiet grace. Until next time, may you find moments to be still, to listen, and to rest in the profound, loving silence of God. Go in peace. 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 Go in peace.